Alrighty, should be starting in a minute. Thanks everybody for hanging around and watching my intro. I'm just going to try to fix up Twitch. Oh, it says it's online now. Maybe. Check that. Twitch. TV/Charles Patals, that's me. What? The video was cancelled. Doesn't seem right. Watch now. Cancelled? I don't want to be cancelled. I'm just going to stop it and try to start it again. Just on Twitch. Oh, what? Well, no, now it says not online. I think it's caught it now. Okay. Not sure what Twitch was doing, but are we working now? I should be recording. Still got my music for some reason. I wonder where that's coming from. I think something's playing. Start recording. Why is it playing? That doesn't really make sense, does it? What if I'm that? Now it's still playing? Where is it playing from? Here? No. Not there. Not here. Not here. Nope, it's still starting. What's going on with my OBS right now? I've got a big music problem. Let's go back to here. BGM. I'm gonna have many Charleses for a minute. Sorry about that. Too many Charleses. Fixing bugs over the music. Not sure where we're at with the music right now. Is it going to do it anymore? No, it seems to have stopped. I'm going to call that bug fixed. If it stopped doing it, then cool. Yeah, I don't know if I've got the stream in like a different window or something. I'm just going to close that. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to COMP1720 6720 for week 2. We're here again to do another live lecture. I'm speaking to many of you live on Teams. I'm having some great comments and chats with people already on Teams. I know there's people out there watching this on YouTube and Twitch as well. And I also know that there are a bunch of you folks out there who watch this on Echo 360, or on Microsoft Stream after the lecture goes up. So hi to all you folks as well. I'm really pleased that you're jumping back in to participate in the class, even delayed by a little bit of time. So today's lecture is going to be another code lecture. We've had one code lecture with me last week on Wednesday, then an art theory lecture with Tony on Friday. Wonderful lecture, great topics. He was talking about Pierre Mondrian prints and discussing in general what is art. I think a lot of people got a lot out of that lecture. Certainly I did. I know that you folks are out there doing your labs, and I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who showed up to your lab this week, talked to other people in the lab, joined little calls with your partner, did some work on P5 Live, partnering up and doing paired programming, and having your visual diaries signed off, and just being an absolute great student. So to all you folks who got in the door for the labs, I'm just really impressed. The atmosphere in the labs was really fantastic. So we're doing things now with online teaching that are a little bit uncomfortable for many of us. They're new. We don't quite know how to do things. But what I can tell you is that if you put in the effort to show up to your labs and talk to other people, I know it can be a big step up in effort compared to just natural social interactions. If you put in that effort, you will make friends over this semester. You will know people in your lab. You will know your tutors because you've talked to them. You've seen them over chat and in meetings. And you will have a great experience in this course. Okay, so it's only for the better, just taking that little step, getting into the lab, doing things, talking to people, recording little videos. I saw someone's little meeting they'd recorded where they had a sketch in P5 Live. They'd worked on it together. They'd recorded themselves explaining what it did. That's absolutely fantastic. In some ways, when people do that, even though it's a bit tricky to get started, we can have a result which is even better than we get in a lab session in the physical building, right? Because we're doing this paired programming thing over video. There can be a lot of great interactions that way too. So let's get down to business, get into this lecture. Topic of this lecture, by the way, two important code topics: flow of code and execution, and variables. So storing numbers in your code, storing things that change, and naming things in your code so that you can access them later. Two very important topics that we're going to talk about today. A little recap from the work we did last week. Just after my admin section. Sorry, jumping ahead of myself. 2 minutes of admin. You folks know that we've got videos on Teams. If you're watching me, you've found the videos somehow. So this videos on the lectures page thing is a little bit redundant at this point. What I can say is maybe switch that up. Make sure you're reading the course website. I know that the course website has a lot of text on it. It's got a lot of text. But the reason is that over the years, every time a student has asked a question, and they're usually a great question, we put another little bit of text on the website. So at this point, the text on the website covers almost everything that you would want to know. And it covers some things that you don't know that you need to know. And once you know it, you might think, oh, well, that was actually pretty good to know that now. Certainly little things about your assignments, how we mark things, how your labs work. By the way, you can go forward in the labs and look at what you're going to be doing. We're not going any faster than one lab per week, but all the lab material is there. You can have a look at it. All the lecture material is there, although, as you might know, we're doing a little bit of work to split up the lectures this year. Last year, there was just one big lecture with art and code together. But you can go ahead and start to understand what else is going on. I know we don't have PDFs on the lecture page soon. I'm just going to have to put that off and try to get that done tomorrow for you. I want to get my script for the PDFs all organized. Labs have started. I know you folks have gone to your first lab. Great job. Well done. Thank you for doing that. You've done your first visual diary entry. And that means, ladies and gentlemen, I need a little drum roll sound bite right now, but that means you've done 1.25% of this course's assessment. So pat yourself on the back. Pat yourself on the back. You're well on the way to completing COMP1720. I know, that's not very much of a percent, but that means that every time you go to a lab, you can feel a little bit good about yourself having completed another chunk of this course and getting that little grade in there. Of course, our assignments are the next thing that you'll be doing towards your grade. And I want to just say to everybody right now, if you haven't had a look at the assignment 1 page, do it today. Assignment 1 has been released. It was released last week. It's due in week 4. And it's actually, not a huge assignment. This is not so tough to do. But it's certainly something that you could be starting now and starting to learn about how you will approach it. And I know that there are students in my course who are emailing me or leaving things on discourse now saying, oh, I don't quite know this bit about the assignment, and I can give them a great answer at this point. If you decide that assignment's not very hard, I'm not going to start it until the day before it's due, and then on the day before it's due you find out, oh, I don't actually know how GitLab works, or I don't really understand how to view my sketch to find out what to do, or I'm confused about what the assignment is really asking me to do, and you put a question on discourse on Sunday night before the assignment is due, you will not get a very responsive answer, okay? You might get something, but it will be more like, oh, why didn't you start this 2 weeks ago, okay? So get in there, give it a go, download the assignment, make sure you know how to do sort of the technical parts of it, uploading to GitLab, forking the assignment, make sure you actually know what you're supposed to be submitting so that when it comes to the due date, you know what to do. That's as much as I'll say about the assignment right now, except basically you've got all the tools you need to do it. Go start it. Go complete it if you want to. I'm not going to stop you doing that if you want to. That's the admin section for today. Thank you for listening. A little bit more admin, I suppose. I know we've got kind of this 2 modes of communication in this course, Teams and discourse. They're both important, okay? With Teams, if you post something and it sort of gets lost in the chat, then it's bad. In discourse, posts don't get lost in the chat. We can see them by their tag. So it's really important that you do use the discourse if you've got a question that you might like someone to answer and then improve their answer. I've had a couple of good questions there already that I've been answering this afternoon. But make sure you set up your email notifications for discourse so that you don't forget when there's an answer to your own question or when there's someone else asking a great question that you didn't know you had. So it's super important to make sure you do that, and super important that every week you attend your lab so you know what's going on in the course and you get your visual diary marks. Now, finally, admin section over. We can do a recap. What did we do last time? Last time we talked about painting like a 5-year-old and how that relates to P5, drawing and programming in P5. So we know that P5 can draw. It can draw anything you want it to, but it only follows your instructions. And it's, in fact, the instructions you give it are from a very small vocabulary. And if you don't know what that vocabulary is, you have to look in the reference. We also talked about how computers think in numbers. And this is a really important point that we'll be getting to later in this lecture, or expanding upon that. We know that there's ways of representing colors as numbers. That was kind of the RGB numbers between 0 and 255. And the grid for numbers, where you're placing a drawing in your browser window in terms of numbers. Maybe moving 100 pixels across, which would be this way when you're looking at it from your perspective, moving 100 pixels that way, and then 100 pixels down, and then drawing your ellipse down here or something, right? So that's the grid for position, and RGB for numbers, RGB for colors, both different kinds of numbers. One thing I didn't tell you much about last week was, I guess, how P5 communicates back to us. So I guess just showing one little thing. Now going to my, I think I'm still big. Yeah, I'm going to be small now. Sorry if I was too big. Making myself small, going into Visual Studio Code, I want my other browser window, please. Thank you. I've got my sketch here. A little basic sketch. Oh, I've got people notifying myself. It's Yichen. I think she's telling me about her honors project, not about COMP1720. Hi, Yichen. I've got my little sketch here, which we'll be working on a little bit more today. But suppose you wanted to type in something and you didn't get it quite right. So I want a square here, but I can't remember how to draw a square. So I'm just going to go like, please draw a square. So is that going to work or not? That's a good question that you might be asking. And maybe, to answer the question of someone who didn't know how to view their code, when we want to start viewing the code we've created, you have to hit this Go Live button down here in the bottom right-hand corner. That's only there if you have installed the COMP1720 extension. So I'm going to hit Go Live, and then I should get my browser window. And it says, please draw a square. But what's happening? Is this right or wrong? Is it not working? I guess I could put it somewhere up here and maybe it'll cause everything else to crash. Oops, maybe I'll do it here. Now I don't have a square and I don't have an ellipse either. How do I know it hasn't worked? Well, there's a thing in your browser called the JavaScript console, and I've maybe said a little bit about the fact that P5 is this nice environment for drawing and learning to code, and JavaScript is kind of the greater programming language that it's written in. So P5 in here and JavaScript outside there, a bigger topic. But the JavaScript console you can get in your browser by going to something. It'll be called like the developer menu or web developer in Firefox. So I hit that, and then I go to web console, and then we start to get some information about what might have gone wrong in our sketch. I'm just going to move this over to the left-hand side so you can see it, but it's very small. You might not be able to quite catch that, but it says uncaught reference error. Please draw a square is not defined. So if you notice as you're coding that your code hasn't worked, maybe you're not sure why. This becomes more of a problem when you write a lot of code. If you've got 5 or 6 lines, you can just look at them all really carefully and make sure they're all right. If you've got 50 or 60 lines of code, then suddenly it's much harder to find where there might be a little mistake, right? You might have spelled ellipse with the incorrect spelling or something, or had the U in color. Then you'll get this kind of exception, which is, or an error, called reference error, where something is not defined. And it will tell you in your code where that is. See, this says sketch.js, line 7. So if I go back to my code, sketch.js, that's this code I've been writing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There it is, line 7 in my sketch, and that's the line that doesn't work. So if I comment it out, put these 2 little slashes in front of it, that means it's no longer going to try to run that code, but it'll run everything else, and then press save. I will find, oops, it's in this one, isn't it? No. When I'm doing a lecture and talking, I suddenly lose the ability to click on things correctly. I'm sure that you've experienced that, public speaking, losing the ability to think. Now I've found that my code is working. Uncomment it. You can press Control and then / to comment and uncomment things. Uncomment it, disappears, big problem. Back to my uncaught reference error. Comment it out, save, and my little red circle comes back. So this is one other way that P5 can talk to you through this console, JavaScript console. I'm going to get rid of that because I don't really want to look at the console anymore today. Going back to the slides. I suppose I should say that, often at a lecture, right at the end, we have a slide which will say something like, who has a question, right? And that's really useful at the end of a talk. When you're in a big lecture theatre and people can yell out a question, how do you do this? Why don't you use semicolons all the time? Does it make a difference? That's great in a lecture theatre, but I can't hear you if you yell. So I'll only know you have a question if you type it in the Teams chat. So if you've got a question, check it in the Teams chat and see if it's something that other people want to discuss. Either I will answer it in the chat or just using my voice, or you'll find other people in the room, in the virtual room, will be answering it. But you have to ask your question before, because it actually, there's a few seconds delay between me seeing it, or my voice getting to you. It's about 40 seconds if you're listening through Microsoft Stream, maybe less with YouTube or Twitch. But if you ask your question soon or now, if you've got a question about something I've said, then I'll be able to address it. And if I see the question, sometimes I stop what I'm doing and go back. So don't worry about asking them anytime. Now, code theory for today. What's today's topic? Two things: flow of code execution and sort of variables, or the kinds of different numbers and types of data we can have within our P5 sketches. And I've written here in the slide, it says types and variables, so different types of data and the variables or names that we give to them. And it says in brackets ontology. So why do I say ontology? Well, that's a different way of saying what things are, the nature of what a thing is. So we know that things like a number is a number and words are words, right? Words are made of letters. What are letters? They're sort of symbols that make up a word, right? So that we can describe things in different ways. So different variables have different kinds of nature of being. That's what we're going to talk a bit about today. Okay, first example. What's the flow through this code? And what I mean is the flow of execution. So which line of code is executed, that is, the computer runs it before another one, and which happens first and which happens last? Or do they all happen at the same time? Oh, where do we write the artist statement for the name tag assignment? I've got a really great question from Janice. I'm going to get to that in a minute, Janice. There should be a .md file already in the assignment repo for you to fill in. So my friend Guffin Kane in the chat has just said, these lines of code are going to be computed top to bottom. Absolutely right, Guffin. So the first line, this one highlighted right now, is the one that's going to be executed first. Then, so first thing we do is draw a rectangle, starting at 300 out, 200 down, and the rectangle is 200 by 200 in measurements. Then we're going to do the ellipse, so we go out 400, down 300. We start again at the 0, 0 point for each of these different commands. We're not sort of going to the rectangle and then continuing 400 out from there. We start at 0, go out 300, down 200. Then we start again at 0, go out 400, down 300, and draw an ellipse. Then we draw a line going out 200, down 200, and then 400, 400 from that. That's pretty clear. Top to bottom, each one is getting executed in sequence. Now I know this seems like kind of too easy, but it's something that we very much have to be careful about, particularly again when you've got a lot of code. You can get confused about which line has actually been executed first. Maybe you weren't so careful and you thought it was a different way. And I'll show you what could cause this to be an issue. What about this one? Line, ellipse, rectangle. So in this one, instead of doing the square first, then the circle, and then the line, we're doing the line first, then the ellipse, then the rectangle. Now, the question I just want to highlight right here, which I think you will all be realizing in your head, is, does this even matter? Is this a big question? Is it a big deal which bit of code goes first? And when we're doing our coding, creating artworks in P5 with code, it does matter, because there was this story about painting we were talking about last week, where each shape or stroke or thing you draw in P5 gets painted on top of what was already on the canvas. So the order does matter. If you do a rectangle and then cover it up with a square, a circle and cover it up with a square, you'll only see the square. Or if you draw a rectangle and draw a line over the top, you'll see that. And if you draw a line and then put a rectangle over the top, the line might get covered up. So it's really important to make sure you know what order your lines of code are being executed in. And it's easy to know. Start at the top and keep going down one at a time. Now, so far we've mainly been just drawing a few little shapes, but I guess one important extra task would be to know how to erase the shapes you've drawn. I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. We use this background command right here. So far we've filled in the background with white. Then we've set our fill color to be red, RGB, red 00, and the stroke color to be red, 25500, and then we draw a circle. But if I happen to move background down here, what do you think is going to happen, right? We set our color to red, set our stroke color to red, draw a circle, and then we color the entire background white. So we're just going to erase everything we did. So if I press save, our circle disappears. Okay, so you have to make sure that we do color the background white first, and then draw the things we want to have visible over the top of it. There we go, just like that. So the background function actually has a lot of different syntax options, mainly in terms of the colors that you can use and whether it has an alpha value or whether it's transparent in some way. So have a look in the references. There's a link right here to how the background is defined. I'll show you a cool way of using it a little bit later. Now, the setup draw loop. This is a very, I just want to get this, no, it's a bit hard to make it visible in my current screen configuration. Maybe I'll make it full screen. There we go. The setup draw loop. So this is like the way your code looks when you just start a new P5 sketch or when you start a new assignment. And we've actually got two functions, and that's where you put your code. So kind of the secret here, we talked about functions last time and said they were kind of a command. So there's actually two functions which you are designing for your code for P5 to run. And the first function is called setup, and the second function is called draw. Now in this code, I've just explained before that when you see these two forward slashes, that's called a comment, and that means it's not a real line of code. It's just a bit of text there for us humans to read and not the computer. So everything that starts with two slashes is just human only. You can type whatever you want there and the computer doesn't care. Anything that doesn't have two slashes has to be like within the right language for P5 and JavaScript to understand. So we write this setup bit of code and some draw code here. Now, how do these things actually get executed? What's the order here? Well, as it turns out, the way that this is set up in P5 is that the setup code runs first, and it runs exactly one time. So right when you press save on your code and it loads in the browser, or if you press refresh in the browser, whatever is in setup will get computed line by line from the top. And then after that, the code in draw will happen line by line from the top through the draw function. And in here, you might see that we've got this loop kind of, we keep saying loop, 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 loop. What does that mean? Well, actually, the setup function just runs once, but the draw function is running over and over and over again. So it's a loop that keeps running the draw function and runs it pretty fast. So the draw loop is running at I think it's a set frame rate, similar to like you would do an animation. You set a frame rate. Maybe if you put too much stuff in draw, the frame rate slows down. I haven't quite tested that out with P5, although I used to do this in processing all the time back in the old days. But it's a loop because the draw function is getting run over and over and over. So the setup draw loop is really a setup, then draw, 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 draw loop. So maybe the hyphen here should be between draw and loop, because setup just runs once, setup, then draw loop. And we'll see this in practice in a minute, but we've just got to get through a little bit more theory. And the point of telling you this is that you have to understand how your code flows through the computer, right? There's a code of execution, a flow of execution. It's a topic which is really important in computing. And often when you have errors in your program, it's because you've typed in something where the flow of execution is confused, or you're not quite sure which thing is happening first, and it's caused there to be an error. And this flow will continue to happen. Draw never stops when you're running your code in the browser. It's always being executed and executed and executed over and over again. So you just have to think of this, the code running in P5 as a flow continuously, never stopping, just like water running over a waterfall. and you just have to sort of harness that flow. Now, I've said the word loop, and probably about 70% of the class is like, oh, I know how to make a loop, I know how to make a loop, I know how to make a loop. That's right, you do, because you've been learned how to make a loop in other computing courses. There's 30% of the class who are thinking, loop, what does that mean? Like a loop of string or a loop of rope or something? Well, no, in computing when we talk about a loop, we're talking about a chunk of code which gets run over and over again, or gets computed over and over and over again. And so far in processing, our only loop is one that's out of our control, which is the fact that the draw function that you define gets computed over and over and over again. Next week, we'll learn to do our own loops in P5. Many of you already know how to do it because you've probably tried it in other languages, but it's okay. Everyone will be catching up. You'll all know how to do your own loops next time. But for now, we just get this loop that we get for free, right? The draw, 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 draw loop. Okay, so the point is, if we running code like what I've written for you, oops, I need to escape. I want to get out of it. Yeah, sorry, I was pressing the wrong button, not escape. If I've got some code where nothing ever changes in the draw function, then I always get the same circle. But if some of these numbers change over time, then we get an animation instead of a circle, okay? A little bit more detail about this, about functions and blocks of code. Now in P5, we've got these braces or squiggly brackets to show where flows or bits of flow start and stop. And you can see a few in your, let's put that over there. You can see a few in the draw function. See, that's one. When you highlight one, it sort of highlights its matching little bracket. That one highlighting the other matching little squiggly bracket. And these squiggly brackets define a kind of block of code, which we're saying to JavaScript and P5, this is an important block of code for some reason. And you know from last week that we had this idea of functions as a reusable chunk of code. So really when you say function and its name, and we'll go through this a bit more in later weeks, this defines the draw function. And then this curly brace is showing the block of code which is going to be run whenever we run that draw function. So it's an important concept that you have these brackets kind of matching, right? Because they define an important block of code. And in fact, that's another thing that you might find if your program isn't working and you're not sure why. Maybe you have to make sure that you've got matching pairs of curly braces everywhere, right? You might be missing some, and you can always check where the matching one is in VS Code by sort of putting your cursor near one, and then the other one will be highlighted. Now, we're going to talk about how flow might change. So far in our code, in the code we've been doing in lectures anyway, all of our drawings are made with objects that are defined by numbers we're putting in. And these numbers never change, right? 200 never changes to be 201 by itself, okay? It's always 200. So if we put in ellipse 200, 200, 100, 100, that ellipse is always going to be in the same spot. It's never going to get bigger, never get smaller, never move around. There are some things in P5 which represent a number, but they do change over time. And that kind of a thing is called a variable. So this is where things start to get a little bit more exciting over time. When we know what these variables are called, we can define our own. We can use ones that are built into P5. We can start to use them to make P5 sketches which are animated. I can do one right now which is actually pretty simple. You might have tried this already, but if I type mouse X, that's a variable that comes inside P5, and every time the draw function runs, mouse X is going to be equal to, it's going to return the value of the mouse. So if I put my mouse in the field, mouse X would be, in the browser window, mouse X would be the number of pixels it is across. Let's just see how it works. If I press Control S and save this, then I can see that my little circle now is chasing my mouse across the screen. So now we've got a number, mouse X is a number, but it's changing over time. So every time the draw loop changes, mouse X might have a different value. And that means that our ellipse can change. Is there any other value that we can use? Well, there's another easy one called mouse Y. You might have seen that one before. I'm putting it in, making it the height of my ellipse now is going to be mouse Y, and the position in X is going to be mouse X. So this is a kind of weird processing sketch. I'm not sure why I did that, but it's now my I've made a little kind of little puppet mouth. Sometimes when you do these little experiments, you find a bit of inspiration. Now I feel like I want to make like a rest of a puppet body or something, and I can speak with it. Hello, my name is Charles. I'm the P5 puppet. Yep. I don't know what happens to me, but somehow I became a computer scientist to be very silly with code, and that's something which you may find out in future, more silliness. Now, we've learned about these two kind of variables, mouse X and mouse Y, and we've given them a little bit of a go. I might show you a few more slides, and then we can try a few more variables in this demo sketch I've given you, I'm making for you. So each time this draw function runs, we can think of that as one frame or one photo in a series. Oh, getting a few P5 ventriloquism. That's exactly what I'm doing, Benedict. Very, very true. So each of your frames, each of the frames in your animation is like one run through the draw loop. And then that will run again and run again and run again. And if you change some of the numbers, or if some of the numbers that are used in your code are variables that do change, then you'll find that you're making an animation which will change over time. Now, a little bit of a digression now, or a little bit more deeply into the code theory part. What kind of numbers can you have in a variable? Or what kind of things are in a variable? So, what kind of numbers are these? We've got the number 7, right? That's pretty simple. You've got a bigger number, 654. Then another number that has a decimal point in it, 5.77. Then the number of planets in the solar system, that's a bit of a tricky one, because if I was asked that question, I'd be like, is it 9 or wait a minute, is it 8? I'm not quite sure what that is. And then your age is certainly a number which is true right now, but if your birthday was tomorrow, then your age would change, just like mouse X is changing. And a potato, so is that a number? Well, just let's talk about this for 1 minute before moving on, but some of these numbers are ones that never change, right? 7 is always 7, just like in my code before, 200 was always 200. It doesn't change. That's the number we get. There's a difference between these two different kinds of numbers. This one is an sort of even whole number of numbers, 654, and this one with a decimal point is 5, and then like just a bit more than 3/4. So it's a number in between two numbers. And normally, often in maths, we think of these two things as kind of different types of numbers. This one is a real number or a rational number if it can be expressed as a fraction. I'm just going to maths talk now for a minute. And this one could be an integer or a natural number. A natural number are just the counting numbers, starting at 1, I think. 0 is not usually considered part of the natural numbers. Or an integer if we're including 0 and the negative numbers. So 654, one of the natural numbers. This is one of the numbers in between the natural numbers, either the rational or real numbers. And in computing, we often think of these ones as different as well. But I'll just tell you in a minute that in JavaScript, actually, we don't worry about these numbers being different. You just think of numbers that have decimal points, numbers that are a whole number or an integer. They're all considered to be the same in JavaScript. These other ones are a bit trickier, right? This one, your age, that's kind of a number that could change over time. So just like mouse X, it can move, change over time. It could be different tomorrow than it is today. And this one is a number where if we ask 10 people, we might get a few different answers depending on how many of them are up to date with the latest arguments in the world of astronomy about whether Pluto is really a planet or not. But it can certainly be certainly be considered to be a number by some. Maybe if we were going to be sort of abstract about it, we'd say it would be undefined, right? Or it's difficult to define, or it depends on who you're asking. So that one's a tricky one. And I can see that Yaya has just put in the chat that potato is definitely a number. It's 907470, which is very clever, Yaya. So there would also be like, it's a picture, but it's an emoji, right? So it's part of the text we type into our computer. So it would have a number backing it somewhere in order for it to be sent to included as part of a text file. It has an encoding, which means it basically has a number. And Guffin has corrected me and said, no, the number is 1. There is 1 potato. So that's another interpretation. I guess it's up to interpretation about that. Now we're going to look at one of these numbers similar to mouse X, which changes over time. This is going to get us our first step towards animation. So here's a number called frame count. What's this frame count thing? Well, frame count is a number which is built into P5. It's a variable. And when you start your sketch, it equals 0. And when you run, after draw runs once, it equals 1. And after draw runs twice, it equals 2. And after draw runs 3 times, it equals 3, and so on. So frame count lets you keep track of how many times the draw loop has run. That is, it also helps you to know how many frames have gone by in your animation. So should we try this out? Let's just have a go at actually using frame count to make a bit of an animation. Let's find my Visual Studio. Oh, I might just sip my water. You know, when I yell at my screen in this room with the heating turned on, my voice starts to disappear. So I do like to have a few sips of water in a lecture. Okay, so here we are. I've got my mouse Y. I think I'm going to leave that one, but I might change mouse X to be frame count. Oh, maybe I'll just get rid of mouse Y for the minute. So absolutely the same code, except my ellipse will have frame count as its X location, its amount out from the left side of the screen, and 200 down, and the same circle size, 100 by 100. Let's see how it works. Heyo. Folks, we just made an animation. I just accept a round of high fives all around from our incredibly advanced animation code. But this is where things start to get a little bit exciting, don't they? We have something which moves and I don't have to interact with it at all. So it's moving by itself. We can make some adjustments here. One adjustment might be to slow it down. So if I take the frame count and divide it by 2, it will be half the speed that it was before. And if I take the frame count and I multiply it by 2, then it will be double the speed it was before. There it goes, right across the screen. It's an ellipse race. I could race 2 of them. You know, last week Tony made this great point that by the time you can make 1 circle, you can make 2 circles. So let's do that. We'll make 2 circles and race them. Hello, 2 times frame count is really in the lead there. It seems like it's going to hit that right edge just as the second one's right in the middle. So it is twice the speed there. Again, being very silly with code. Folks, I warned you. One other thing, maybe we would like one thing to mention right now is this point about how each frame is kind of drawn and what the starting point is from it. So actually each frame is drawn on the top of the previous frame. And one thing we've done here is just put background inside the draw function. But what happens if I put background, instead of in the draw function, I put it in the setup function? So background here is going to paint the whole browser window white, and then I'm going to draw my two ellipses. So let's see what happens now. Hey-oh, that's different, isn't it? What's happening? So if we think about our flow right now, thinking about flow, then the setup gets run first. We color the background white, then we draw two ellipses, then frame count moves a little bit, we draw two ellipses, and we never erase it. Then frame count moves a little bit, we draw two ellipses, don't erase it. Frame count moves a little bit, two ellipses, don't erase it. And we end up with these two lines across the screen instead of two circles. So it's like we've gotten a paintbrush and just sort of slowly scraped it all the way across the screen from left to right, this way. Yeah, so another trick now that I like to do rather a lot is to, instead of completely erase the field after every time we run this code, I might not completely erase it. I might like just rub it out a little bit. So if I make the background white, that'll erase it. But if I add an alpha value or a transparency value here, then I can control how much it gets erased. So it's like I'm putting a sheet of kind of semi-transparent white material across the top of the screen that's going to erase a little bit everything that was there before. So that's this 100. It's not fully turned on, it's most of the way turned off in transparency. Now you can see a bit of a speed blur behind this one, can't you? I'll turn it down even lower so you can see that effect really clearly. Now we get a cool speed blur. And an even longer speed blur from the, now we're getting pretty synthwave with that speed blur. Cool. Someone's going to explain to me. I don't know the answer right now, but it's got to be something to do with color blending and processing and browsers and JavaScript, why we get this little pink smear across the across the browser window when I have this background erased, or not fully erased, but kind of semi-transparently erased. Because there's no pink here, but there's pink that never goes away just behind my speed lines. I'm glad that I can impress a few people still in the chat. I am going very slowly, so I know it might seem like this is crazy stuff, but I've got a few tips and tricks yet up my sleeve, so hopefully even if you know a lot, you'll learn something. And if you're just starting out with your coding, I hope this is at a pace that you can handle and you feel you have enough time to think about what's going on. Change color mode to lightest? Blend mode. Oh, okay. We'll talk about that in another lecture, I think, but the blend mode is a bit more in depth. Someone's just asked why I didn't put the semicolons. Oops, you're always supposed to put the semicolons in JavaScript right at the end of the line, but it turns out that if you don't have them in JavaScript, it doesn't care. So I'm not sure why we still do that. Sometimes we do things for historical reasons in coding. Like, I guess the semicolon thing, here's a point of the semicolon thing. If I run this code, this is definitely going to work. I've got my speed lines. And actually the semicolon thing is telling JavaScript that this is the end of a line and whatever follows it is a new command. So I can actually put like fill and stroke on one line. I can put everything on one line if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I'll just put fill and stroke on one line and they will be considered by P5 to be two different commands, and so it still works. If I take away that semicolon, there's no semicolon between these commands, and there's no new line. And now is when P5 gets confused. So it doesn't know if I mean this to be one command or two commands or what. It doesn't know how to interpret that. So the one way to say ready for the next command is to put it in a new line with the enter key. That's actually a character, if you didn't know. If you open up a text file and look at exactly what's there, there's a character called the new line character. Every time you have a new line, there's one of those things in there. And if you put in the semicolon, that's like, I know there's a new line, but I just want to make absolutely certain you really know that there's a new line here. So it's just an extra bit of extra care. But sometimes I forget, as I just did right then. And by the way, if you've worked in other programming languages like Python, there's no semicolons in Python. If you put them in, it doesn't care, it just ignores them. But if you don't put them in, that's fine too. That's the way it's designed to work. Okay, back to the lecture, back to something important. We've talked about frame count. It lets you start to do these animations, and you can do some pretty interesting things with them, right? You might remember my intro outro animation. All of the moving parts of that animation are just done with frame count. Very, very simple way of adding some moving objects to your sketches. Oops, I wonder if I'm missing something in this slide. Sometimes the slides, oh yeah. So here's this thing about variables. When we have a variable, the name of the variable stays the same, frame count, mouse X, mouse Y, but the value is different in different times. Value is different if it's different times. So yeah, so it's very, very important to make sure that you know what some of these things do, the built-in kind of variables. I'm going to tell you about making your own variables in a minute. But this is the thing about variables. Same name, different contents. Now, there are some variables that are always the same. I guess 100, it's not really a variable. I would call that a constant, right? Or a literal, in fact. So 100 describes what it is. So it's called a literal in computing. That means it's literally 100, right? There's some numbers which are always the same, but they have a special name. And one of those numbers is pi, which is to do with circles and stuff if you're into maths. But if you're not into maths, you know, we'll address that if it's needed. And there are some numbers which change over time. So your age is one of them, frame count is one of them, mouse X is one of them. So a definition of a variable, just from a computing perspective, in programming, a variable is how we give a name to a value which can change. And this is really handy because we often want to keep track of a bunch of changing numbers in our code, keep track of them, so that we can use them in other ways, right? It was really great that I could use frame count for both ellipses because it meant that one of them could be definitely faster than the other. It was always, this one is exactly twice the speed of the previous one, or exactly twice as far out as the previous one, as the second one actually. Name stays the same, value can change. Very important computing point. Yeah, we talked about this. This is great. There's a lot of slides here which I've already talked about in the demos. So I think my lecturing style is to do more demoing in P5 and less talking about the slides. So going through the slides, it's great that everything's written out. You can revise it later if you want to. But a lot of the demos, I talk about the same stuff. So here's mouse X and mouse Y. We've already discussed that. Now types and your own variables. Two more topics or little points today to make. Types. Why have I got a picture of Pikachu here? Well, anyone who's played Pokemon knows that Pokemon have like a fundamental identity of what kind of Pokemon they belong to. And Pikachu, obviously, because it has the Thundershock attack, belongs to the electric class of Pokemon, electric type. And Pikachu also being kind of like a normal animal, I think also belongs to the normal type. So is that right? Pikachu is normal and electric? Someone can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. But the point is that every Pokemon has a type. I think Guffin's in there. This hurts. Sorry, Guffin. Yes, all Pokemons have types, just like all variables have types in P5 and JavaScript. So what kind of types are there in JavaScript? Well, here's the ones there are. This is a list of all the types there are. There's numbers that can be either a whole number or a fractional number, 100 or 4.5. They're both of number type. there is a string, which means a string of text. That means that like, you know, there's a bunch of letters which are in a certain order. Okay, so hot potato, note the double quotes around it. That means it's a string literal. A sequence of letters all strung together to be a bit of text. Boolean type, so that's things that are either true or false. George Boole is a mathematician from the 19th century who worked on a branch of mathematics of just seeing what would happen if you only consider two values in your mathematics, not like all the numbers there are. And those two values are often considered to be truth values. So maybe you've done a little bit of logic as part of your computing studies or as part of your other studies. You will have known that we can have statements that combine different truth values in different ways. We'll talk about that in next week's lecture. The undefined type, that means P5 doesn't know what it is. That's an important one because sometimes you make a variable that ends up being undefined. And the object type, which is like anything more complicated than that just gets bundled under object. And for that, you'll have to wait until week 4 where we talk about objects. You can have a look in the references for all the different types. I've got this up, Mozilla Developer. MDN Web Docs has all of the JavaScript types. You can find more information. Now, mostly so far we've dealt with numbers, but it's not always numbers we're dealing with for variables. We'll have a lot more variables in this course. Now we get to the big one, declaring your own variables. There are 3 steps to declaring a variable. The first step is to just say that, announce to P5, I would like to have a variable. P5, give me a variable. I want it to be called age. That means that there's going to be a variable called age. And then the second step is to give it a value. And so far, if you just declare it, that variable is of the undefined type. That's where undefined comes in. Then we initialize this variable with a number. For instance, age equals 34. So that's setting the age variable to 34. And then the third thing you do with your variable is use it in your code somewhere. So 2 times age, or put age in as the parameter to a function somewhere, and that's where you actually get to have fun with it. So let's just add a variable to this code. I'm gonna not call it age, I'm just gonna call it like Charles cool variable. Or maybe I'll give it a name which is what I'm gonna use it for. So like X ellipse position. Yeah, cool. So I've got my variable and I've declared it. Bam. Can I use it? Let's see. Check it in there, check it in here. Get my code back and see if it works. So far it has not worked. And I wonder if you can guess why. I don't know, I guess I didn't choose to try this out before. Uh-oh, we've got a bunch of issues here. Bunch of issues. Something is undefined, so I think it's got some real issues with this this variable. We haven't defined it yet. We've only initialized it. So actually we can define it in a lot of places. We could define it right here. X ellipse position equals 100. And then I'll get my 2 ellipses will show up. One is going to be at 100 out from the left-hand side. The other is going to be 200 out because we've used it with X ellipse position times 2. This is really handy because now we could have a lot of ellipses that have different positions. This one could be, we could have 3 ellipses instead. One's 3 times out. There's another place, and this is mostly where you'll see variables getting initialized, is right next to them. So in the one line, we can define it and initialize it. Works just the same. So you'll mostly see it done like this. I guess I should note that there are sometimes when I'm typing out code in JavaScript, instead of writing var for variable, I might write let. And this, if you've done some maths, this might make sense to you. Let x equals 10. And that, when you just read it out, you sort of know what that means. Let x equal 10. That means we've got a variable x and it equals 10. That works in JavaScript as well. Let and var are very subtly different, but in general, they will behave the same for you. The difference is quite strange, so it's sort of a historical reason why that's different. But I'm going to use var today. It does make sense. We're talking about variables, so I would call it var. So var x ellipse position equals 100. Now, so far, I've just been reading from that value. But what if I want to write a new value into that variable? How do I do it? Well, here's how I do it. I'm going to type x ellipse position equals 200. So now I've changed it, made it 100. Then I've drawn these ellipses, then I'm changing it 200, and then I'm drawing ellipses. And so far, I drew them once there and moved them over here, and then they got slowly erased by my nice background fading out effect. But what if I wanted to change the x ellipse position, or like add one each time? Well, when I change it, I can use its value in there as well. So I can say x ellipse position equals, x ellipse position plus 1. And now I've got my moving circles back. It's just doing the same thing as frame count now, in that it starts at 100 and then it goes to 101 after one draw loop, then 102, then 103, 104, 105, etc. And it might be a little bit strange to you, thinking from a mathematical perspective, well, this doesn't make any sense. X ellipse position can't be equal to x ellipse position plus 1. That just doesn't make sense. It's impossible. Then 1 would equal 0, right? But the problem with programming is that we use the single equal sign not to say that the two sides of this equation are equal. We're using this to say, set the value of x ellipse position to be whatever is here after the equal sign. So it's an operator of defining something, not an operator of testing equality. If we test equality, we actually use a different operator, which is two equals sign. So we'll get onto that next week, but it's a little bit confusing when you get started. If you have one equals sign, that's not testing equality, that's setting something to be a new value. Alrighty, so we got our changing variable. I've defined a variable. What else did we have to do in this week? I've declared some variables, min and max. We can change them over time. There's another great variable you can try called random. This is something Tony's going to talk about a bit more on Friday, is using random numbers in your art. Guffin's asked a great question about defining operators. I'm not sure. You can try that at home, the plus equals operator. He was saying, does plus equals work? Or maybe plus plus. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Can't type. Plus plus. I don't know. Try it and see. And get back to me. Have a look in the docs. Random numbers are quite handy. They give you a number between 0 and the number we've chosen. If I go back to my code here, and that wasn't quite what I wanted. I don't know what I've done here. I've lost what I'm doing. Oh, maybe I'll put this in somewhere else. Var. I'm going to move my ellipse position here. I can get rid of that. And I'm going to change this to be a random number between 0 and window width. Window width is another variable, which is the width of my window. So now I've got some circles moving into random positions all over that window using this random function, which returns a number for me. And then I can store it and then use that number 3 times for different things. So that's handy. What else have we got here? Modifying variables, we talked about that. Really important thing about modifying variables is that you don't need to use the var declaration the second time. You only use var when you're using a variable for the first time. And here in the draw function, I'm using the var variable choosing a random number, and then maybe I get back and I actually define it again, and that's sort of, it's only getting defined within this function. So I would like to define it each time. If I define it outside of that function, then it only gets run once, so I won't have a random number anymore each frame. I'll just have one random number, which will start at the sketch and never change. I'll save that. No, it doesn't run it if it's outside there. That makes sense. I might put it here. Bar ellipse position. I'm just going to comment that off, and then I might run it once. Random window width. Okay, now I've only got one. I think the others have run off the screen there. Now, in general, you know, we learn about these things by using them. So there's not a whole lot of detail I'm going to go into about every aspect of variables. You're going to be playing with this in your labs and your assignments, and you'll learn a lot about it that way. One last note about the maths here is that most of the operators you're using are kind of primary school maths: plus, minus, times, divide. There's a big list of all of the arithmetic operators that you can use in P5 on MDN. I've referenced MDN about 10 times in this lecture. It's important that you do have a little look at the docs to make sure you understand how JavaScript works. We go into these in more detail in the labs about these operators. Okay, one last little demo. I guess I'll let you people go and do a to-do list. After this lecture, your to-dos are to work on your visual diary for week 3. Make sure that your tools are working on your computer. You've got Git, you've got VS Code, and you know how to use them. Make sure you're practicing, and make sure you start assignment 1 so that you can have a problem and you can ask me about the problem, and I have time to help you, because I can't help you if you ask me the day before or the day of the assignment being due, okay? So make sure you start early. That's your to-do. I've got some really important things or some reading that you might like to do, and reading and watching. Another video by Dan Schiffman, some things about flow and variables in the JavaScript reference, and then about an artist called Katharina Gross, who we're just going to sort of do a pretending to be Katharina Gross demo right now. So Katharina Gross is an installation artist and a painter, and she often works with these kind of amazing spray painted artwork, so spraying these bright colors over sculptural installations and walls. So we're going to make a kind of spray painting sketch in P5 just for 5 minutes. I always say I try to go no longer over, but you know, it's online lectures, so so jump in and go to something else and catch up later if you have a lab to go to. This is just using all the skills we've learned today. It's not really going to be anything new, but putting it all together. So just get my background back. Now I'm going to make a circle over my mouse, just like I did before. Whoop. So now I can kind of draw with my mouse. And if I move slowly, you see I kind of got this spray painted effect. I guess my, I want it to fade out, but I want it to fade out really, really slowly. So I'm going to make that as the minimum possible fade out. Now, one of the things I'd like to do in my sketch is actually make the color a little bit different. So what I could do is use a random color here, random 255, random 255, random, 255. So I can make a random color for fill and a random color for stroke. And you remember that fill was kind of the interior color of a shape, and stroke was the color for just the edge. So if I do this, that's working, but it's like a different color each time. And that's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted to choose a random color every time I start my sketch. So that's not going to work. I'm getting something that's really quite maybe unappealing now, or maybe triggering for some. So I'm going to stop that. There, stop. No. Phew, okay, we got rid of my color. I'm just white on white. So what I really want to do is make a variable for my red color. Color. What should I call it? Yeah. Red, green, and blue. And I'm going to generate a random number for each of those here in the setup. So it's going to happen once. Equals. I forgot my semicolon, but it doesn't matter, so who cares? Okay, and then if I use those here, whoops. I don't know, I'll just start again here. Fill, R color, G color, B color. So I can use my variables that I've already set up to kind of just contain those color values so I don't lose them in between draw frames, right? This is when you really need to start using variables. When you've got some information that you've set up somewhere and you want to save it for later, then it's really useful to have a variable there. Okay. So now I've lucked upon this nice magenta. And it's fading out, which is really cool. Got my drawing tool. I might make it is that too big for that? So if I could even use my pen here and just pen that in, sort of drawing in the window. Might make it a little bit smaller. And then every time I press restart the sketch, I get a different color. Well, that's cool. What if I start changing my color as I'm going along? Now I'm thinking about things which are a little bit like slightly things that are using just what we've learned today, but maybe pushing them a little bit further. So I want to change it after each frame. I've set all the RGB to start in a certain place, but I'm going to add one to them. R color equals R color plus, whoops, G color. I'm just going to copy that and do the same thing. G color, and there's going to be B color, G. Okay, so now my color starts out purple and then it just slowly becomes white. So eventually, eventually those numbers are more than 255. So then the color would just be white. So I've got a problem here. I want it to go to like 255 and then start again from 0, if you know what I mean, right? I want my color, if my color starts at 200, I want it to add 1 to 201, 202, 203, 204, get to 255, and then like, bam, go around the other way and end up at 0. And I just want to find out what that's going to do. And I can do that, getting some more messages from, oh, it's certainly percent time. I think we've got two answers here. One's from Tao and from Guffin. It's percent time and you should add percent 255. That's right. But what is that going to do? What does this percent sign do? And it's not normally something that you would see if you haven't done much programming before, but it's something that's really useful in processing. Yeah, it's called the modulus operator. And it's something used in computing all the time. You don't see it as much when you're doing maths, although you might do a bit of modular arithmetic. You know in maths how you've got kind of the clock goes around to 12, and then it just sort of 12 o'clock is sort of the same as 0 o'clock, right? Once you get to 12, you're at 0, and then if you add 1 hour to 12, you get to 1. And it's just like that with this sign. What this is going to do is say, I want this number, if this number is more than 255, I want the remainder when I minus 255 from it. So it's actually calculated by doing a division and then finding the remainder at the end of that division. Effectively, my number is going to get to 255. As soon as it gets to 255, it'll become 0. And then we'll start from 1 again. So that's going to be what I want it to do. Put in some brackets. So we've got getting my BODMAS on with order of operations. I always forget the order of operations, so I just put in too many brackets in my code just to make sure I know what's going on. Hello, now we're getting somewhere. It does sort of have these weird changes where something goes over the boundary from 255, but that's still pretty cool. It's changing color slowly and then always ending up with something else. I'll see if I can get different random numbers. It might be more interesting. We've always got a cycle of numbers. Cool. Okay, so this is kind of my spray painting demo. Hope you liked it. I guess I'll make it the full screen. Ooh, if I restart the sketch at full screen, it should just take up the whole. Oh yeah, there we go. I'll use my pad, my tablet here. Yeah, you know, maybe I could become a painter too. Probably not with this. I have to work on a more advanced tool, but Tony can disagree with me. Now, you folks all have your work to do. The labs are done for this week. That means you've got a little bit of time to think about your visual diary for next week. You've got a little bit of time to be thinking about starting your assignment. And you've got some time to come back here on Friday afternoon to listen to Tony, who will be talking to you about random numbers and generative art, which is a really, really fun thing to talk about. So we talked about a bit of randomness today, but not in great detail. So I'm going to say thank you very much for coming. I've just gotten very calm when I'm painting. It must be a Bob Ross effect. Thank you very much for coming. I will catch you next Wednesday, if not in one of your labs this week. So thanks for today. Another exciting idea from Rani, adding a random number between -2 and +2. That'd be cool.